In the 2010s, we entered the golden age of superhero movies. Marvel successfully translated its comic books into big-budget filmmaking, giving us movie after movie. It released 21 films between 2010 and 2019, raking up more than $21 billion in tickets worldwide. And then there was DC. While Marvel was busy building its cinematic empire and weaving a grand story together over years of film, DC couldn't seem to get the hang of big-budget filmmaking, with Christopher Nolan's Batman franchise being the one real standout. Considering that DC is some of the most globally popular intellectual properties on the planet. So what was DC doing wrong? There was a feeling that DC was wasting a golden opportunity. In 2013, DC unveiled Man of Steel, Superman's third interpretation on the big screen in 35 years. That movie kickstarted what we now know as the DC Extended Universe, the company's attempt at building a shared universe in film and TV. But what would follow would be a decade of hits, misses, creative blunders, executive shakeups, and lots of drama. Development for the first bona fide DC Cinematic Universe film began in 2008 when Warner Brothers took pitches from comic book writers, screenwriters, and directors on how to successfully reboot their characters. Among those who pitched ideas were lauded comic book writers Grant Morrison, Mark Waid, Brad Meltzer, Mark Miller, and Jeff Johns, who would end up having an executive role some years down the road.
Our approach was not a comic book Superman, it was just to do a more realistic Superman, a Superman that exists in a real world.
Fresh out of post-production on The Dark Knight Rises, Christopher Nolan pitched an idea from his screenwriting partner David S. Goyer that got Warner Brothers executives excited enough to hire him to produce and Goyer to write. Nolan said to Empire magazine in 2010, "We were just sitting there idly chatting and he said, 'By the way, I think I know how to approach Superman,' and he told me his take on it. I thought it was really tremendous. It was the first time I'd been able to conceive of how you'd address Superman in a modern context." After approaching many directors, including names like Guillermo del Toro, Robert Zemeckis, and Duncan Jones, the gig eventually went to Zack Snyder.
Love Superman. I want Superman to be okay. Right. Because he represents so much. He's the first. He's the greatest superhero. Right. He's the top of the pyramid, especially in the DC universe.
After a botched Green Lantern film in 2011 that bombed at the box office, the pressure was on Man of Steel to launch DC's shared universe. Man of Steel debuted in June 2013 and ended up grossing some $668 million worldwide on a budget of $225 million. The film faced scrutiny for its tonal choices,
"You're a pack of fools, every last one of you,"
video game visuals, and significant reliance on Deus Ex Machina plot devices. But it still managed to resonate positively with audiences and critics, creating a sense of anticipation for the next chapter in the DC universe. Enter Batman vs. Superman: Dawn of Justice. Seeing these two characters clash on screen has probably been the biggest nerd fantasy of all time. Ever since Frank Miller's The Dark Knight Returns provided a taste of what a confrontation between DC's biggest characters would look like, the temptation to take the ultimate brawl to the big screen had been on the table, begging to happen.
The whole climax of the book ends up being Superman and Batman literally trading blows as Batman rains upon him with kryptonite gloves. And really in that moment, you're seeing the fire of liberalism pound the crap out of the staid, conservative era of the 1980s.
After more than a decade of speculation, Batman vs. Superman finally emerged from the depths of the Warner Brothers vaults to become a reality. The announcement came at San Diego Comic-Con 2013, where Zack Snyder confirmed that he, along with David S. Goyer and Christopher Nolan, would reunite for a follow-up Man of Steel that would introduce a new version of Batman.
We knew we had established a Clark Kent Superman character in a world that we now could build out from. And we just felt like it was an original and interesting concept to pit him against another hero, but a darker hero. And Batman was the perfect foil.
Snyder and Nolan briefly considered having Man of Steel share continuity with Nolan's The Dark Knight trilogy, but decided against it. Given The Dark Knight Rises ends with Joseph Gordon-Levitt taking over the mantle of Batman, things would have gotten unnecessarily convoluted. The Joker and the Riddler were also supposed to appear in the film, but Snyder ultimately decided to cut them from the final script. Wonder Woman ended up being included, marking the very first time DC's Divine Trilogy appeared on screen. Joining Henry Cavill would be Ben Affleck as Batman, Gal Gadot as Wonder Woman, and Jesse Eisenberg as Lex Luthor. Soon after the cast was announced, the internet erupted with fans expressing their discontent. The backlash reached such fervent levels that a petition was launched on the Change.org website, demanding the removal of Ben Affleck from the project. Affleck was not the only target of the angry cyber mob. Social media was filled with disappointment over Jesse Eisenberg and Gal Gadot as well. In an interview with the LA Times, Snyder defended his decisions, arguing fans might see things differently if they could just read the script. "We know the material. Unfortunately, the fans don't know the material. So we're casting according to what's happening in the script," he said. "And we're hoping that leads to enough originality, enough perspective on what we're doing that you get something fresh and exciting. I understand the canon. I'm not crazy. I know what these characters need from a mythological standpoint." The movie ended up being a mishmash of The Dark Knight Returns and the death of Superman, two of the most iconic stories in the world of comics. It also included nods to other beloved comic book storylines like Flashpoint and Injustice, providing Easter eggs that most hardcore comic book fans absolutely loved.
Must be exciting, and you're getting critical praise as well. I want to say, Richard Roper in the Chicago Sun-Times said there's not a moment when you don't believe Affleck is Bruce Wayne. Comicbook.com, where you go, wait, they said Affleck is the greatest on-screen Batman.
Dude, don't think
Not too shabby.
Please.
Not bad.
Don't scare people into thinking this is a critical film. We're not going through the film critics circle or it's an audience movie. People can actually like this movie.
Affleck was right. Comic book fans were more than forgiving on the film, while reaction from critics was a whole different matter. The film got a 29% approval rating with an average score of 5 out of 10. It was called god-awful by the New York Magazine and one of the most assaultive movies ever made by the Wall Street Journal. Ollie Richards of New Musical Express wrote, "Anticipated for decades, the grand punch-up between Superman, Last Son of Krypton, and Batman, Lost Son of Gotham arrives not with great fanfare, but with a big, wet, farty raspberry. It's such a disappointing movie." With a budget of $250 million, the film managed to amass an impressive sum of $873 million at the box office. The interpretation of those numbers can go both ways. On one hand, ranking among the top 80 highest-grossing films of all time can be seen as a success. On the other hand, not reaching the billion-dollar mark with a movie featuring 3 of the world's most beloved characters in pop culture can be considered an utter disappointment. Either way, the movie did manage to do one thing: established for the first time the DC universe on film.
Once you see Batman and Superman standing, looking at each other in a movie, now anything's possible, right? The worlds have finally meshed up, and I think that the implication of that, of course, is that there's a massive universe, DC universe, that's just ready to explode.
The muted performance of the movie made Warner Brothers reevaluate the way it handles its DC properties. To streamline future feature projects, the company appointed John Berg and Jeff Johns to co-run DC Films, a dedicated division focused on bringing DC stories to the big screen and TV. Later, in December 2016, Warner Brothers appointed Toby Emmerich as President and Chief Content Officer, overseeing a slate of 5 to 8 films from New Line and 10 to 12 films from Warner's primary label. As part of the restructuring, Greg Silverman stepped down from his role as President of Creative Development and Production in what could be considered the first casualty of the DC cinematic universe. The move was meant to bring more efficiency and creative consistency to the studio's film releases. Although the initial 2 films of the DC cinematic universe achieved financial success, the prevailing sentiment was that an opportunity of immense potential had been missed, considering the profound history associated with these iconic characters. So what was the problem? Poor choice of the originary material? Subpar writing? Probably the most consistent issue up to that point was the inability to achieve the right tone. Warner Brothers' initial bet for the DC universe was to replicate the real-world plausibility of Nolan's Batman trilogy, but they were unsuccessful in the sense that the screenplays of both films appeared to prioritize building up the action sequences and catering to fan expectations, and not too much thought was invested in trying to marry the outrageous, fantastical elements from the comic book world with the real world. Also counterproductive to this superheroes in the real world intent was the decision to pair overly stylized synthetic-looking VFX with real-life elements. Add in an unnecessarily dark color grading, and you get a final product that was somewhat enjoyable but left an insipid aftertaste. These tone issues would reach another level with the following installment in the DC cinematic universe, The Suicide Squad. The original Suicide Squad was created by writer Robert Kanigher and artist Ross Andru, appearing in 6 issues of The Brave and the Bold number 25 in 1959. It followed a small group of hasty military operatives daring to take on missions nobody else would accept in their sane mind. The idea of the Suicide Squad being a government-sanctioned team of expendable criminals and villains was introduced in 1987 by legendary writer John Ostrander. It became known for its over-the-top action and the fact that any team member could die at any time. Although beloved by die-hard fans, the Squad was never among DC's most popular teams. That's why it was a surprise that in 2014, Warner Brothers chief Kevin Tsujihara announced the project as part of a slate of 10 DC films stretching into 2020, with David Ayer, writer of the Oscar-winning film Training Day, signed to direct. The on-screen team lineup would include Rick Flag, Deadshot, Harley Quinn, Captain Boomerang, El Diablo, Killer Croc, Katana, and Slipknot. Enchantress, a powerful sorceress considered to be one of the most dangerous black magic practitioners in the DC universe, was picked to be the main antagonist. Ayer's initial screenplay featured Steppenwolf as the main antagonist, but Warner Brothers wanted to save the character for the Justice League, which led to radical rewrites just 6 weeks prior to filming. By most accounts, the actual filming of Suicide Squad went pretty smoothly. Ben Affleck shot a cameo to further connect the film to Batman vs. Superman, and Jared Leto was touted as the new Joker, having just won an Oscar for his work in Dallas Buyers Club. A few weeks after principal photography wrapped in 2015, Ayer and the cast made a surprise appearance at San Diego Comic-Con to promote the film. At the convention, they unveiled a 3-minute sizzle reel that showed a dark, gritty, and dramatic version of DC Comics' anti-hero team. The footage, which was never meant to be seen by the general public, was leaked online by a fan who uploaded a potato-quality version on YouTube. That set the alarms off at Warner Brothers, who didn't want their multi-million-dollar investment being promoted with a low-quality teaser. The underwhelming box office performance of Batman vs. Superman, combined with the immense success of Marvel's Guardians of the Galaxy, in addition to the enthusiastic response generated by the Deadpool trailer unveiled at Comic-Con that same year, caused waves of concern among Warner Brothers executives, who began to reevaluate the tone of the project. While the initial reaction to the Comic-Con footage was positive, the tone of the film took a dramatic shift with the release of the first official trailer in January 2016. The new trailer showcased a relentless barrage of comedic and action-packed moments, perfectly synchronized with Queen's iconic anthem, Bohemian Rhapsody. The film underwent such a significant transformation that it felt like an entirely different beast, complete with revised titling and a revamped color scheme. It almost looked as if Warner Brothers was trying to rebrand Suicide Squad as an affair closer to Guardians of the Galaxy and Deadpool, something the film was never intended to do. Ayer's script was conceived as a serious military action movie in the style of his war film Fury, a very different tone than the fun, edgy vibe promised by the new trailer. While Ayer continued to pursue his original vision in the editing bay, Warner Brothers embarked on crafting an alternative cut, enlisting the help of Trailer Park, the company responsible for the successful teaser. Ultimately, Warner Brothers found themselves with 2 different versions of the film, so they held screening tests to determine which one resonated better with audiences. That's when something comically absurd happened that made things even messier. Usually these screening tests come out with a clear winner, but not in this case. Reportedly, they did about $22 million in reshoots written by Jeff Johns in 2016 to try to combine the tested cuts and make a more lighthearted film. The reshoots involved significant changes to the original third act, resulting in an almost entirely different sequence. New scenes were added that removed the elements of abuse in the relationship between Harley Quinn and the Joker, aiming to make the film more appealing to teenage audiences. In the end, the theatrical release we all saw was a combination of the most well-received parts from both films and audience tests, along with the new scenes commissioned by Warner Brothers. But here, things got even more complicated. In response to producer Charles Roven's interview, director David Ayer went on Twitter to dispute the narrative that both cuts of the film tested similarly. The director wrote on Twitter, "No, wrong. Stop. The cuts tested were the studio cut and my version of the studio cut. This was literally the bad cut." When Suicide Squad was finally released in August 2016, it was an unexpected box office hit, making almost the same that Deadpool did. Critics bashed it mercilessly, but we bet Warner Brothers executives didn't lose any sleep over it. With a budget of $175 million, Suicide Squad ended up raking in $746 million, ending as the 10th highest grossing film of that year, just 3 places below Batman vs. Superman. At the time, most of the drama surrounding the troubled post-production of The Suicide Squad happened far from the public eye, and the film's commercial success diverted attention away from the turmoil. But since 2020, in the wake of Zack Snyder's Justice League social media storm, more and more details of the mess have surfaced in the media. Adding fuel to the fire, director David Ayer has taken to the internet, sharing insights into the production process and expressing his frustrations over the studio's alteration of the film's intended tone. He has said many times that the initial Comic-Con trailer from 2015 is the only publicly available representation of Suicide Squad that aligns with his original vision. From one of his tweets, "This trailer nailed the tone and intention of the film I made," Ayer tweeted, going on to say, "Methodical, layered, complex, beautiful, and sad." After the Batman vs. Superman reviews shell-shocked the leadership at the time and the success of Deadpool, my soulful drama was beaten into a comedy. The response to the revelations has been so strong that DC fans have initiated an online campaign urging Warner Bros. To release Ayer's original vision with the hashtag #ReleaseTheAyerCut. After the numerous twists and turns of this chaotic production, it turns out Ayer's vision does in fact exist, stored within the depths of a hard drive. The director himself confirmed on Twitter that Lee Smith, Christopher Nolan's longtime collaborator, was responsible for assembling Ayer's original intent. "The studio cut is not my movie." Read that again. "And my cut is not the 10-week director's cut. It's a fully mature edit by Lee Smith standing on the incredible work by John Gilroy." One of those lucky fans, an individual identified on Twitter with the handle #ReleaseTheAyerCut, revealed the director personally screened the Ayer cut for them. "I had the honor of being shown the cut by @DavidAyerMovies. No BS. 2 hours, 23 minutes of incredible. A totally different story. Forget the theatrical. This movie has a deeper message." Since the film's release, Warner has undergone multiple executive changes, and the movie itself has undergone a soft reboot. But it's unlikely that Ayer's cut will ever see the light of day. However, it appears that this saga is not over yet. In early 2023, David Ayer confirmed he had spoken with James Gunn, the current co-head of DC Studios. While he didn't reveal any details, he was optimistic. "I spoke to him a while ago, all with patience. He has the right to put together his new universe before visiting the past. Cheer up, good things are coming." However, he was less optimistic in an update piece in 2025. He told Screen Rant that DC was focusing on moving forward with their universe and trying not to look back at the timeline. Not a good sign for #ReleaseTheAyerCut fans. But other good things did come for DC in the meantime, in the form of a character that had never embarked on a solo cinematic adventure before. Since first appearing in All-Star Comics #8, published in October 1941, Wonder Woman has had multiple screen adaptations, mostly confined to TV. The first attempt was a 1967 5-minute short produced by William Dozier. The short was intended as a proof of concept for a Wonder Woman comedy TV series that never came to fruition. Later, she starred in a 1974 TV movie intended as a pilot for a series being considered by ABC. Starring Kathy Lee Crosby, the character was inspired by the depowered comic book version of Wonder Woman of the late 60s and early 70s. Created by editor Dennis O'Neil and writer-artist Mike Sekowsky, the character was depicted as a fashion-conscious, mod-inspired martial arts expert/super spy.
What I did, in effect, was take the feminist icon and depower her, dial her way down, and then to compound the sin, give her a mentor who is a male. And then to compound that sin, name the male after one of the classics of Chinese literature.
But audience response was timid, and ABC decided not to pick up the plot. Instead, they developed an adaptation closer to the character's superhero roots of the 40s, with Linda Carter in the role. That series ran for 3 seasons on ABC and CBS through the mid to late 1970s, and today is considered a cult classic. Since then, the character has had mentions and occasional appearances in other series, but every attempt to take her to the big screen had failed. In 1996, Ivan Reitman of Ghostbusters fame was attached as producer and possible director, but nothing happened. In 1999, the project became attached to John Cohen, who adapted Wonder Woman for producer Joel Silver with the hope that Sandra Bullock would star. Then in 2001, Todd Alcott, scribe of the animated film Ants, was hired to write the screenplay, with Lucy Lawless, Mariah Carey, and Catherine Zeta-Jones considered for the role. The project languished in development limbo for over a decade, undergoing countless rewrites. Finally, in 2015, Patty Jenkins, whose debut film Monster in 2003 had earned Charlize Theron an Oscar, was officially confirmed at the helm, with a new screenplay written by Alan Heinberg. Gal Gadot would once again step into her role from Batman vs. Superman to star in the first solo Wonder Woman film ever. Warner Studio executives have dramatically interfered with the director's vision in every DC Universe movie up to this point, and Wonder Woman was no exception. In the climactic scene of the third act, Princess Diana confronts Ares, the god of war, who unveils his role as instigator of World War I. The final battle that ensues suffers from exaggerated and subpar visual effects, falling short of the standards set by the rest of the film. Turns out, the studio imposed the ending, according to director Patty Jenkins. Apparently, her original finale featured actor David Thewlis sans visual effects, fighting Diana Prince in a much smaller but thematically stronger confrontation.
The whole point of the movie was that you get there to the big monster and he's just standing there looking at you and saying, I didn't do anything.
Right.
Yeah. And then the studio kept saying, okay, we'll let you do that and then we'll see. And then I could feel it creeping up. And then at the last minute, they were like, you know what? We want Ares to show up. And I was like, God damn, we don't have time to do that now. Nope, you got to do it.
With a budget of $150 million, Wonder Woman made some $821 million at the box office, pretty close to what Batman vs. Superman raked in, and more than what Justice League made a year later, both with a much higher production budget. Diana Prince's first solo film ranked 10th among the highest-grossing movies of 2017, and reviews were largely positive. Many critics even signaled it as the best DC Universe film so far. Andrew Barker of Variety wrote, "Never prone to stewing in solitude and taking more notes from Richard Donner than from Christopher Nolan, Patty Jenkins' Wonder Woman provides a welcome respite from DC's house style of grim darkness. Boisterous, earnest, sometimes sloppy, yet consistently entertaining." But DC's most ambitious project yet was still to come. The Justice League might be the group of the most well-established characters in global pop culture. Thanks to more than 70 years of stories, countless cartoons, mountains of merchandise, video games, and presence in practically every piece of media known to mankind, it's hard to find a person who isn't even remotely familiar with these characters. So the hype for a Justice League film was real. Talks of a Justice League movie date back to 2007 when Warner Brothers began to develop a live-action Justice League film with George Miller set to direct. Titled Justice League Mortal, the first draft of the script written by the husband-wife duo Kieran Mulroney and Michelle Mulroney received positive feedback from Warner Brothers executives. But back in 2007, DC's biggest properties, Batman and Superman, were in a delicate position. Although Nolan's Batman Begins and Bryan Singer's Superman Returns both had good reviews, the audience response was less than enthusiastic. A Batman sequel was scheduled for 2008, while Bryan Singer's Superman follow-up was expected to play in 2009. Lots of questions circled Warner executives at that time. Should they bring Christian Bale and Brandon Routh to reprise their roles? Should they prioritize the production of the Justice League film over the sequel of Superman Returns? Pressure to start production before the announced 2007 to 2008 Writers Guild of America strike, the studio dropped the Superman sequel and shifted their focus entirely towards Justice League, giving it a budget of $220 million. But Christopher Nolan reportedly didn't want a new Batman iteration on the big screen before his own trilogy concluded. Ultimately, Justice League Mortal was abandoned. Fast forward to 2014, and the DC Cinematic Universe is already underway. Following Man of Steel and Batman vs. Superman, Snyder was confirmed to direct a new Justice League project with Chris Terrio on writing duties. Not that Warner executives were too pleased to see Snyder back. Greg Silverman, who served as the president of Warner Brothers at the time and was the executive behind successful films like The Dark Knight, The Hangover, and 300, was known for providing the filmmaker with the creative freedom necessary to bring his vision to life. However, DC was facing challenges with Snyder's films. In fact, some analysts said those films were actually eroding the brand rather than enhancing it. This goes to show you how much the brand has eroded since Batman vs. Superman. That was supposed to be the precursor to something even more momentous, but that never ended up happening because of how badly BVS performed. The word of mouth has just been toxic. According to The Wrap, following the disappointment of Batman vs. Superman, executives approached Silverman multiple times pressuring him to remove Snyder from Justice League, but they were already too deep into the project, and firing the director at that stage would have projected desperation and weakness. so they decided against it. DC might have been in turmoil on the inside, but the image they projected was the opposite. Justice League continued its development, with new information revealing that the film would include not one, but two standalone installments inspired by the Fourth World comic series by Jack Kirby. Greg Silverman ultimately stepped down in December 2016 and was replaced by Toby Emmerich, a longtime manager at New Line Cinema. At this point, the snowball of problems was already rolling, and there was no stopping it. The studio brought in Ben Affleck to help with script rewrites and serve as executive producer, mainly to ensure continuity between the film and The Batman, a new solo Bat film which he was expected to star in and direct at the time. Then, Warner Chairman and CEO Kevin Tsujihara assigned Jeff Johns and Warner Brothers co-production head John Berg as production watchdogs. At least one of them had to be on the set every day. This was just the beginning of the onslaught of interference and constant script revisions the project would endure. Jeff Johns, seasoned comic book writer whose Green Lantern and Flash runs are among the most beloved of all time, was serving as DC Chief Creative Officer and Executive Producer on the film. Soon after principal photography began, it's reported that Johns did extensive rewrites, which caused friction with Terrio and frustration on set. Rumors circulated of scenes constantly being changed on the fly and daily uncertainty among the cast and crew. WB allegedly grew so unsatisfied with how the John Snyder version was shaping up that they convened an emergency footage summit and invited outside writers including Joss Whedon, Alan Heinberg, Seth Grahame-Smith, and Andrea Berloff to offer feedback. Ultimately, Whedon was enlisted with Snyder's blessing to help add some levity and fun to the script. And then, tragedy struck. Snyder's daughter, Autumn Snyder, died by suicide in March 2017 at age 20. In my mind, I thought it was a cathartic thing to go back to work, to just bury myself and see if that was the way through it. The demands of this job are pretty intense. It is all-consuming. And in the last 2 months, I've come to the realization I've decided to take a step back from the movie to be with my family, be with my kids who really need me. They're all having a hard time. I'm having a hard time. Joss Whedon took over to finish the film. In July 2017, it was announced there were going to be 2 months of reshoots in London and Los Angeles, with Warner Brothers setting an extra budget of about $25 million, which brought the overall cost of the film close to $300 million. The reshoots overlapped with Cavill's schedule for Mission Impossible Fallout, during which he had grown a mustache that he was contractually obligated to keep throughout the whole shoot. Initially, the director of Fallout, Christopher McQuarrie, gave permission to the producers of Justice League for Cavill to shave his mustache. But this was on the condition that they pay $3 million to cover the costs of pausing Fallout's production until the mustache grew back. Unfortunately for DC, as soon as McQuarrie's bosses at Paramount Pictures found out, they rejected the deal. Infamously, the Justice League VFX team was then forced to digitally remove the mustache in post-production, which we all now know ended with less than spectacular results. To make matters worse, even with all the drama and rewrites, Warner Brothers refused to delay the film's release so that their top executives could receive their cash bonuses before the company's merger with AT&T. According to an unnamed executive who spoke to The Wrap, WB President Toby Emmerich and CEO Kevin Tsujihara may have been afraid that if they delayed Justice League, these bonuses would have also been delayed or even lost. Who could have predicted that a hurried production with a patchwork script, the clash of two divergent directorial approaches, and lackluster visual effects would end up being an epic train wreck? Justice League was released theatrically on November 17, 2017 to underwhelming reviews and utterly disappointing box office returns. Critics and general audiences agreed the movie was an absolute Frankenstein, with criticism focused on the weak plot, uneven pacing, and underdeveloped characters. A studio executive who requested to remain anonymous said about the movie to Vanity Fair in 2021, "When we got to see what Joss actually did, it was stupefying. The robber on the rooftop, so goofy and awful. The Russian family, so useless and pointless. Everyone knew it. It was so awkward because nobody wanted to admit what a piece of shit it was." Box office-wise, the film managed to even underperform the underperformance estimates, taking in less than $95 million domestically in its first weekend, becoming the worst opening of all 5 DC movies up to that point. With a budget of $300 million, Justice League ended up grossing $657 million, not even reaching the estimated breaking point of $750 million. Justice League's terrible box office gross prompted another executive reshuffling at Warner, with DC Films co-president of production and co-chairman John Berg being shown the door that December. A month later, in January 2018, Warner Brothers promoted Walter Hamada, executive producer on the Conjuring film series, to oversee its comic book movies. On top of it all, the negative perception of the film intensified as reports of on-set irregularities started to emerge. Ray Fisher, known for his role as Cyborg, publicly accused Whedon of abusive behavior on set, while also asserting that Warner Brothers executives enabled his actions. Gal Gadot also disclosed her own negative experiences with Whedon, which she brought to the attention of higher-ranking individuals within the production. In November 2020, HBO, a division of Warner Media, ended up parting ways with Whedon on the sci-fi series The Nevers, but it has never been disclosed if the move was a result of the allegations. In the aftermath of Justice League's poor performance and the thorny allegations against Whedon, a new narrative arose on social media. #Release the Snyder Cut. When Snyder and Warner called it quits on Justice League, he departed with his black and white 4-hour original cut. This raw version lacked finished visual effects, music, and was in no shape to be screened to the public, but to Snyder, it was the only tangible reminder of his vision. Based only on rumors of its existence, fans started clamoring online for its release. A petition on change.org to release the Snyder Cut gained almost 180,000 signatures, giving momentum to the spontaneous movement. Online fans elevated the Snyder Cut to an almost mythological status. The group grew over the years, with fans even investing money in the cause. Groups paid to have single-engine airplanes fly a Release the Snyder Cut banner around both the Warner Brothers studio lot in Burbank and around the 2019 Comic-Con gathering in San Diego. In January 2020, the movement bought 4 minutes of ad space advocating for the film's release on a digital banner wrapped around the interior of Riverside Stadium during Tottenham Hotspur's third-round clash with Middlesbrough in the FA Cup. And of course, trolls found a way to wreak havoc. Former DC Entertainment president Diane Nelson was forced to delete her Twitter account after substantial online harassment by members of the movement. Warner Brothers telephone operators were inundated with prank calls demanding the Snyder Cut. Eventually, it became impossible for Warner Brothers to ignore the movement. Warner Media decided to move forward with the Snyder Cut in February 2020 after Chairman Toby Emmerich acknowledged the #Release the Snyder Cut movement and reached out to Snyder. A lot of people at the company, myself included, always felt badly that Zack didn't get to finish his vision of the film because of the circumstances, said Emmerich to Vanity Fair. And so if there was a way to make it logistically and financially possible, which HBO Max did, and Zack had a willingness to do it, it seemed like a win for everybody. The Snyders invited executives from Warner Brothers, HBO Max, and DC to their home to view the Snyder Cut and talk about possible solutions, such as releasing the movie in episodes. Impressed, the executives decided to let the project proceed. At last, Snyder had free rein to make his vision a reality. The effort was almost thwarted by the COVID-19 pandemic, but the Snyders pushed to continue with it. The first proposal from Warner Brothers was to release the raw footage as is, something he rejected on the spot. I was like, that's a no, that's a hard no, he explained to Vanity Fair. Here's why. 3 reasons. 1, you get the internet off your back, which is probably your main reason for wanting to do this. 2, you get to feel vindicated for making things right, I guess, on some level. And then 3, you get a shitty version of the movie that you can point at and go, see, it's not that good anyway, so maybe I was right. I'd rather just have the Snyder Cut be a mythical unicorn for all time. The deal was simple. It would cost around $70 million to undo Whedon's version. In exchange, HBO Max would get 4 hours of hot content and the Hollywood comeback story of the decade. Although the Snyder Cut is a very different film from the 2017 release, and all in all much closer to the director's vision, the new movie isn't exactly what Snyder and Terrio originally intended. That version included a romantic relationship between Lois Lane and Bruce Wayne, and the plot heavily revolved around the nightmares we've seen since Batman vs. Superman. In a decisive moment in that initial script, Darkseid teleports into the Batcave to murder Lois, which makes Superman susceptible to the anti-life equation, a mythical formula that allows those who know it to dominate the will of any sentient being. Darkseid then enlists the corrupted Superman to his cause, and together they conquer Earth. All of this ended up just being hinted at in the Snyder Cut. Still, the Snyder Cut is very different from its predecessor. Starting with the image ratio, which went from landscaped 185:1 to a box-shaped 133:1. It also has a very different color grading. The new cut features Jared Leto's Joker, Martian Manhunter, and Superman's black suit. The opening interaction between Superman and the children was taken out, the same as the subplot with Batman chasing parademons. Gone is Superman's weird mouth and all of Whedon's quips and jokes. Other additions include a new ending, a different score, and more screen time for Flash, Cyborg, and Aquaman. Steppenwolf got a makeover, and the initial confrontation between the forces of Apocalypse and Earth was tweaked and extended. But the most personal touch in the new cut was the inclusion of Autumn's beloved song, Leonard Cohen's Hallelujah. Within the film, the iconic track is performed by Alison Crowe, a dear friend of Snyder's who had also sung it at Autumn's funeral. In a heartfelt tribute, Justice League became a profound elegy dedicated to her memory. And so, after 4 years of fan pressure, it finally happened. Zack Snyder's Justice League premiered on streaming platforms in the US in March 2021 and gradually became available internationally in the following weeks. In October 2021, the president of Warner Media Entertainment Networks for Europe, Priya Dogra, called the film a global phenomenon. According to Flix Patrol, Zack Snyder's Justice League was the second most streamed movie on HBO in 2021. This version of the film got an average score of 71% on Rotten Tomatoes and an audience score of 92% favorability. Although audience reception was overall positive, critics were divided. Robbie Collin of the Daily Telegraph called the movie a mad and magnificent 4-hour apocalyptic pop epic, giving it 5 stars out of 5. Owen Gleiberman of Vanity praised Snyder's direction and vision as it exudes a majestic sense of cosmic historical evil. He even went as far as comparing it to Peter Jackson's Lord of the Rings trilogy. The Observer, on the other hand, gave it 1.5 stars out of 5, bashing it for being longer but not much better than the Whedon version. Zack Snyder's Justice League may feature altered scenes from its chopped-up counterpart, but it's unlikely to play any differently to general audiences, apart from feeling like more of a slog. Its mere existence guarantees that someone somewhere will be satisfied, but the film's improvements are hardly enough to fix what was, now quite apparently, a flawed endeavor from the start. After 4 years of disappointments, executive reshuffling, and controversy, success for DC came from the most unlikely of places. A blonde guy dressed in orange who's practically useless aside from riding giant seahorses and talking to fish. And yeah, his name is Aquaman. The character has always been kind of a joke in pop culture, especially thanks to its silly to the point of surreal depiction in the popular Saturday morning cartoon of the 70s and 80s, Super Friends. Nobody would have thought that the most meme-ified character in comics would end up being the one to save the DC cinematic universe. Plans for a solo Aquaman film have been doing the rounds since the early 2000s with nothing concrete ever happening. Justice League Mortal was going to be the first live-action rendition of the character, slated to be played by Santiago Cabrera, but hopes of seeing the King of Atlantis evaporated when the project was abandoned. After a successful appearance in an episode of Smallville in 2005, the producers of the show were encouraged to develop a solo series with the character. In early 2006, a pilot episode for Aquaman was produced with a budget of $7 million, featuring Justin Hartley in the lead role. It generated significant buzz within Warner, but they ultimately did not proceed with the series. In 2014, soon after Man of Steel kicked off the DC Cinematic Universe, Warner Brothers renewed their interest with Peter Jackson as their first choice to direct. But Jackson was uninterested in superheroes and busy with his World War I documentary, They Shall Not Grow Old, so he declined. In 2015, it was confirmed that Furious 7 director James Wan was going to be in charge of the project, with a script by Will Beall. Later, Johnson McGolrick, who had previously worked with Wan on The Conjuring 2, was brought in to rewrite Beal's script. The project was visually so complex, it required the help of most of the biggest VFX companies in the world. Giants in the industry like Industrial Light and Magic, Weta Digital, Rodeo, and DNEG joined forces to work on the 2,300 visual effects shots that appear in the final cut. Despite the scale of the project, Aquaman's production moved pretty smoothly, and the film was finished on time for its release in December 2018. It was very different from its DC Universe predecessors. The color palette was brighter, and the design of Atlantis was completely different from the peak we got in Justice League. Mera, who was shown as a serious, regal warrior with a British accent in Justice League, was now lively, even humorous. The tone of the film was much lighter and playful compared to previous DC installments. Swashbuckling, fun, and even cheesy at times, James Wan's Aquaman managed to achieve what Warner Brothers had aimed for from the beginning, reaching the $1 billion mark at the box office. With a budget of $160 million, it raked in almost $1.2 billion, making it the 5th highest-grossing movie of that year and turning it into the most commercially successful DC Universe movie to this day. DC's good streak would continue, again, this time from another dark horse. Shazam is a character that survived several twists and turns throughout its history. In fact, when it debuted in 1940, he wasn't even called Shazam and wasn't even published by DC. Created by Bill Parker and C.C. Beck, this superhero's name was Captain Marvel, part of the now extinct Fawcett Comics. During the 40s, Captain Marvel was probably the most popular superhero in the world, outselling Superman and Batman. But DC sued Fawcett in 1941, claiming the character copied Superman. After a long lawsuit, Fawcett decided to quit publishing comics altogether in 1953. In 1967, Marvel recognized that the copyright for Captain Marvel was not being used, so they created their own version of Captain Marvel. In 1972, DC Comics acquired the characters from Fawcett and embarked on reviving Captain Marvel, but Marvel held the copyright for Captain Marvel, preventing DC from using that name. To work around this, DC renamed the book Shazam. DC has been attempting to develop a Shazam project since at least 2009. However, the similarities with Superman and the challenge of finding the right tone for the character prevented the film from getting off the ground. But in 2017, the studio had begun development on Shazam with David Sandberg confirmed as director. Sandberg previously helmed the horror films Annabelle Creation and Lights Out, which at first led people to think this was going to be another dark and moody entry to the DC universe. But the reality was quite the opposite. In 2018, lead actor Zachary Levi described the project as the family movie Big, but with superpowers. Remember DJ Catrano was going to play Superman in the failed George Miller project Justice League Mortal? And Adam Brody was slated to play The Flash? Both did end up being a part of the DC universe after all, Catrano playing the superhero version of Pedro and Brody playing the superhero version of Freddy. Released in 2019, the movie grossed $365 million on a budget of $100 million. Probably the most well-received entry of the DC cinematic universe to date, Shazam was praised by critics who lauded its heartfelt messages and positive tone. Shazam takes us deeply into primary colors in a single bound. This new DC entry has a lovely lightness both in the visuals and in its tone. Shazam has a 90% approval rating on Rotten Tomatoes with an average score of 7.3 out of 10. Not too bad for a superhero that's been out of the mainstream view for over 50 years. And then Warner had to change the tone yet again. This time, they jumped from a PG-13 family film to an R-rated frenetic bloodfest. Probably the one thing that audiences and critics unanimously praised from Suicide Squad was Margot Robbie's charismatic portrayal of Harley Quinn. Robbie, leveraging her star power, pitched in 2015 the idea for an R-rated girl gang film loosely based on the Birds of Prey run by Chuck Dixon and Gail Simone, one of the most revered in the recent history of DC Comics. In May 2016, Warner Bros. Announced the project, confirming Robbie was not only attached to reprise her role as Harley Quinn, but would also serve as producer. Christina Hodson, who penned the Transformers spin-off Bumblebee, was set to write the film. Later, in April 2018, Warner Bros. And DC Films had finalized a deal with Kathy Yan to direct, making her the first female Asian director to direct a superhero film. Yan had only directed one feature film previously, the independent effort Dead Pigs, which had received good reviews during its festival run in 2018. Robbie talked about the choice of director in an interview with Collider in 2018. And then, of course, having a female director to tell that story, and giving a female director the chance to do big-budget stuff. They always get, here's the tiny little film. I was like, I love action films, I'm a girl. What, are we meant to only like a specific thing? So it was hugely important to find a female director for this if possible, but at the end of the day, male, female, the best director gets the job, and Kathy was the best director. Anxiety was high among Warner's top brass, with the project helmed by a relatively inexperienced group of creatives. DC executives have been pursuing making their own Deadpool for a long time, and Birds of Prey is probably the closest they've gotten to achieving it. Violent, frantically paced, with a soundtrack full of hip songs, with the main protagonist breaking the fourth wall, swearing and spitting jokes nonstop. Birds of Prey was released in February 2020 with the obligation of making at least $250 million to break even. With a budget of $84 million, the movie grossed $205 million, falling short of its objective. They took a swing and they missed, said Jeff Bach, a box office analyst with Exhibitor Relations. It wasn't for the movie masses, it was a niche comic book movie. Warner Brothers keeps having to learn these lessons. The film broke DC's hot streak of commercial successes since the debacle of Justice League. Some point out that the film's bad performance could have been due to its title. The film was originally called Birds of Prey and the Fantabulous Emancipation of One Harley Quinn, but many, including theater owners and distributors, thought it was unnecessarily long and confusing. Back when Wonder Woman hit screens in 2017, it stood as Warner's lone beacon of light amidst a sea of misfires. It was only natural that talks of a sequel were on the table fairly quickly. In June of that year, Jeff Johns told Variety, "Patty and I are writing the treatment right now. The goal is to make another great Wonder Woman film. I had a blast making it with Patty the first time. We've got a cool idea for the second one." Later in September, The Hollywood Reporter broke that David Callahan, writer of The Expendables, would join the project to co-write the script alongside Jenkins and Johns. Although Warner Brothers and the creative team were tight-lipped about the story, Jenkins revealed the action would take place in the US during the Cold War, even teasing that the heroine's signature invisible jet could make an appearance. Later, in early 2018, it was confirmed that comedian Kristen Wiig was in talks with the studio to play Cheetah, the main villain of the film, and that Pedro Pascal, who played a part in the canceled 2011 Wonder Woman pilot, was cast as Maxwell Lord, one of the most feared antagonists in the comic book DC universe. Things were looking good, but then COVID got in the way. Initially, the movie was scheduled for December 2019, but after several delays, it ended up premiering a year later and under unprecedented circumstances. The film was intended for a full worldwide theatrical release, but due to the closure of many cinemas and the uncertainty surrounding the reopening of theaters, Warner Brothers made the decision to release the film simultaneously in theaters where possible and on the streaming platform HBO Max. The release strategy for Wonder Woman 1984 was referred to as a hybrid release, allowing audiences to choose between watching the film in theaters or streaming it from the comfort of their homes. The decision sparked discussions and debates within the industry about the future of movie distribution and the potential impact on theater attendance. The release strategy ultimately had an impact on the film's box office performance. Wonder Woman 1984, with a budget of $200 million, fell short of its potential, accumulating only $169 million in box office revenue. The lukewarm critical response didn't help either. What were Maxwell Lord's motivations to rule the world anyway? And wait, Diana Prince can now turn things invisible?
My father hid the mascara from the world, and I've been trying to learn how we did it.
Did what?
Made something invisible.
Where'd that come from? And let's not even start to talk about Steve Trevor inhabiting another man's body and having sex with Diana. Manohla Dargis of the New York Times wrote, "Patty Jenkins is behind the camera again, but this time without the confidence." Adam Graham of the Detroit News said about the film, "The result is far from wondrous. A reminder of the limitations of the superhero genre and the ways its escapist trappings sacrifice key storytelling elements for empty spectacle." After a poor reception of their promising Wonder Woman sequel, Warner was desperate to change the tide. Where to look now? The 2016 Suicide Squad was a mess of a production, but Warner had enough in the bank to fast-track a sequel. Initially, director David Ayer and star Will Smith was expected to return, with several spin-off films also in development, including a solo Deadshot movie. Another project floating around was an all-female team-up film with Margot Robbie reprising her role as Harley Quinn based on the DC Comics run Gotham City Sirens written by Paul Dini. That project eventually turned into Birds of Prey, with David Ayer serving as executive producer. As tensions escalated between Warner Brothers and Ayer over the studio's interference with his original cut of Suicide Squad, they started exploring options to find alternative directors. Names like Mel Gibson and Chama Colette Serra were thrown into the mix, with Colette Serra eventually landing the opportunity to direct Black Adam a few years down the line. In September 2017, it was reported that Gavin O'Connor, director of Warrior and The Accountant, was chosen to helm the film and co-write it with Anthony Timbakis. Black Adam was reportedly the main villain of O'Connor's script, with Dwayne Johnson having expressed interest in playing the role. The project was fairly advanced by October 2018 when O'Connor decided to leave, supposedly out of frustration with Warner Brothers. The studio had begun to develop Birds of Prey in parallel to his film with a similar story and borrowed elements from his script for Suicide Squad 2. Soon after, it was announced that James Gunn was in talks to write and direct. Gunn, who was working on Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 at the time, had been fired by Disney in July after some controversial tweets he made between 2008 and 2009 had resurfaced. Warner received him with open arms and even offered him Superman. But Gunn wasn't interested in the Son of Krypton. He wanted something fresh, so the studio suggested a once-in-a-lifetime alternative. Make whatever you want. Gunn was free to adapt anybody out of the DC catalog, and he ultimately decided on The Squad. From the beginning, his movie was envisioned as a standalone film that could be seen either as a sequel or as a separate entity from Ayer's 2016 film. Gunn's idea for the script was primarily inspired by comic book writer Ostrander's influential 80s run, aiming to capture the essence and spirit of that era. Curiously, 8 months after Disney fired Gunn, they decided to reinstate him as director of Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3. The reversal was mainly due to online outcry from fans and, most importantly, by the cast. Gunn's reinstatement earned him support from Marvel Studios president Kevin Feige. Feige encouraged Gunn to create a remarkable film for DC and even agreed to delay production on Guardians until the completion of the Suicide Squad project. Warner Brothers was incredibly supportive of Gunn from the start, even giving him carte blanche to kill any member of the team, including Harley Quinn. According to Gunn, the film featured the biggest sets ever built for a Warner Brothers film, including a reproduction of a disheveled South American town the size of 3 football fields, and a beach that included a palm tree forest and artificial waves. The Suicide Squad was released worldwide in 2021 and was also made available on HBO Max in August for a 1-month premiere streaming window, in a strategy similar to Wonder Woman 1984. With a budget of $185 million, the film had a poor performance at the box office, only ranking in $168 million during its theatrical run. The disappointing box office performance can be attributed to several factors, including its R rating, release during a pandemic, and simultaneous availability on streaming platforms. Despite acclaim for elements like the hyper-stylized sequences that showcased violence through Harley Quinn's perspective, critics remain divided on whether its over-the-top silliness was a stroke of genius or simply too much of a good thing. Chaos and Collins for Rolling Stone gave it 3 stars out of 5. Thank goodness for the brutish, maximalist, shitbag silliness of the Suicide Squad, which is a bit overstuffed, exhausting in its commitment to every single one of its too many bits, and emotionally overconceived, but wise enough, nevertheless, to be stupid where it counts. The Suicide Squad underperformed at the box office, but at least there was a general consensus that, stupid or not, the movie delivered on the fun factor. But the drama to come behind closed doors at Warner Brothers was anything but fun. Black Adam is one of the most enigmatic characters in the DC universe. Arch enemy of Shazam, the Justice Society, and the Justice League. Plans to bring him to the big screen have been brewing since the early aughts, with Dwayne Johnson flirting with the idea of either playing Shazam or Black Adam since at least 2014. Remember Gavin O'Connor was attached to Suicide Squad for a hot minute? In his script, the Suicide Squad would be tracking a weapon of mass destruction, which would be revealed to be Black Adam. The plans were of course abandoned when O'Connor left that film in 2018. Warner rekindled their interest in Black Adam shortly afterwards in the wake of the successful release of Shazam. Plans rolled fairly quickly, and by June 2019, Jean-Michel Collet-Serra was in talks to direct the film after impressing Johnson as the director of Jungle Cruise. It's no secret that Dwayne Johnson has been circling the DC universe for a while, and that he had big, ambitious plans for his character. Ever since the ball started rolling for Black Adam, Johnson had touted in the press that DC's hierarchy of power would change after his introduction.
I need you guys to help me get a message out to some of the other ones. Some of the other DC superheroes. Let's let Flash, Shazam, Aquaman, Wonder Woman, Batman, and Superman. Let's let them know something. Things will never be the same, because the hierarchy of power in the DC universe is about to change.
As reported by Variety, Johnson personally pitched his ambitious long-term vision to Warner Brothers CEO David Zaslav. His plan involved developing various interweaving Black Adam and Superman films led by Henry Cavill, designed to build up to an epic showdown between the two characters. Johnson was so determined to have things go his way that he bypassed key figures at Warner Brothers, including DC head Walter Hamada and Warner Brothers film chief Toby Emmerich. This bold move reportedly caused friction. One of those uncomfortable scuffles had to do with Cavill's cameo in Black Adam. Superman was never in the original script, but during production, Johnson asked DC Films head Walter Hamada if they could bring Henry Cavill for a post-credits scene. When Hamada rejected the idea, Johnson leapfrogged the executive and sought the approval of Warner Brothers Pictures heads Michael DeLuca and Pam Abdi, who gave the green light.
We all stayed to watch the credits, and you're going, is there going to be a post-credits scene? And of course, no spoilers here.
The most powerful and unstoppable force in the entire universe has been on the sidelines for too long. We fought, and we weren't going to take no for an answer. We were going to deliver it to the fans, and then at the end, welcome home.
Hey everyone, I am back as Superman.
This came after Warner Brothers cut ties with Cavill after the debacle of Justice League. And it ruined plans for Black Adam to ultimately face Shazam, not Superman. And Black Adam's actual performance didn't help Johnson's cause. The movie had its world premiere in 2022. With a budget of $195 million, the film grossed almost $400 million, $50 million shy of the breaking even point. On top of a disappointing box office, reviews were lukewarm to say the least. The film holds a 38% tomato meter rate on Rotten Tomatoes with an average rating of 5.1 out of 10. Liz Shannon Miller wrote about the film on Consequence. On its own merits, Black Adam might feel a little thin in terms of story, but it does deliver plenty of enjoyable moments and a solid ensemble to back up Johnson. But perhaps the most exciting aspect of it is how it might shake up the rest of the franchise going forward. Discovery Inc. completed its acquisition of DC and Warner Brothers' parent company Warner Media in April 2022, forming a new company named Warner Brothers Discovery. Its new CEO, David Zaslav, sought to overhaul the DC cinematic universe, searching for a creative leader akin to what Kevin Feige does in Marvel Studios. After 15 years at Warner Brothers and 4 as DC Films president, Walter Hamada was separated from the company. When James Gunn and Peter Safran were hired as the new co-executives of DC Films in late October 2022, they came in with their own plans. They considered various options but decided to fully reboot the universe. This meant that all the films left in the DCEU would lead nowhere. Peter Safran said to Gizmodo, DC Studios is just a standalone studio production entity. And it's unprecedented because it's the first time ever that all film, all television, live action, animation, and gaming is all centralized under one creative vision. Their proposal was a 3-year interconnected vision for the DC cinematic universe that didn't include either Cavill's Superman or Johnson's Black Adam.
Henry Cavill, you brought him back, but now they're saying he's not playing Superman. What do you say to that?
I think it's almost like when you have a pro football team and your quarterback wins championships, the head coach wins championships, and you have a new owner. And the new owner comes in, says, not my coach, not my quarterback, I'm going to go with somebody new.
The executive battles going on with Black Adam were not the only briefcase scuffles happening behind the scenes at the time. Warner was about to shock the entertainment business, and not in a good way. Back in 2017, and hot on the heels of his participation in Justice League, Joss Whedon was brought on board to write and direct a Batgirl film, with John Berg and Jeff Johns overseeing the project. However, after a year of struggling to develop a story, Whedon departed in February 2018. Batgirl is such an exciting project, and Warner's DC are such collaborative and supportive partners that it took me months to realize I really didn't have a story, Whedon told The Hollywood Reporter in a statement. Warner Brothers and DC Films consider replacing him with a female filmmaker to align with their plans for a more inclusive approach. Christina Hodson, who was brought in to work on Birds of Prey, was hired in April 2018 to write the screenplay for Batgirl. In December 2020, there were discussions about potentially releasing Batgirl exclusively on HBO Max as part of a new plan for the DC cinematic universe. By April 2021, Batgirl was included in DC's slate of films expected for release in 2022 or 2023. Adil El Arbi and Bilal Fallah, the duo behind Gangsta and Bad Boys for Life, were hired to direct the film a month later. In April 2022, Warner Brothers executives were considering a shift in the release strategy for the film. Instead of a streaming release with a $70 million budget, they were contemplating a theatrical release with higher post-production budget and increased marketing efforts. Leslie Grace, famous for her role as Nina Rosario in The Heights, was cast in the titular role, and J.K. Simmons was later confirmed to reprise his role from Justice League as Commissioner Gordon. Brendan Fraser was announced to play the sociopathic pyromaniac Firefly, the main villain of the movie. In December of that year, Michael Keaton was revealed to be appearing in the film, bringing the Tim Burton Batman back to the big screen for the first time since Batman Returns. But wait, what does Tim Burton's Batman have to do with Zack Snyder's Commissioner Gordon? It seems fans were not the only ones left scratching their heads. We would also ask, oh, you have J.K. Simmons from the Snyderverse and we got Michael Keaton from the Burtonverse. What's the situation there? Director L. Arby said in an interview with The Direct. Suddenly, in August 2022, it was revealed that the upcoming Batgirl movie, which was nearly complete and had already been going through test screenings, was being shelved by Warner Bros. Discovery. We are saddened and shocked by the news, the filmmakers wrote in a statement on Instagram. As directors, it's critical that our work be shown to audiences. And while the film was far from finished, we wish that fans all over the world would have the opportunity to see and embrace the final film themselves. Maybe one day they will, inshallah. Just months before its shelving, Batgirl generated significant anticipation as one of the most exciting upcoming DC films. The project was celebrated for its representation, with Leslie Grace as the first Latina lead in a DC Extended Universe film and transgender actress Ivory Aquino in a supporting role. Filmmakers Adil and Bilal, with their Muslim, Belgian, Moroccan background, added a unique perspective. And the return of Michael Keaton as Batman added to the film's appeal. An early test screening of Batgirl featuring temporary visual effects and music received a score in the low 60s. For Warner executives, that score was definitely not an incentive to save the project. Batgirl was a casualty of new corporate strategy from Warner Bros. Discovery CEO David Zaslav, who opted to shelve the project in order to take a tax write-down on the $90 million film. The news spawned a worldwide reaction, with many on social media using the hashtag #ReleaseBatgirl to call on Warner Bros. To release the film. Marvel Studios president Kevin Feige and directors including James Gunn, Kevin Smith, and Edgar Wright all voiced their support for the cast and crew who had worked on the project. But it was a money-saving tactic for Warner Bros. If the film's not shown to the public, Warner Bros. Discovery can take a tax write-down as a money-losing project. According to The Hollywood Reporter, Warner Bros. Even considered the drastic move to destroy the Batgirl footage as a demonstration to the IRS that there could be no revenue from the project, allowing the studio to claim a full write-down immediately. The movie was neither good enough or big enough to merit its release, so the multi-million-dollar investment was wiped off the slate. But there were still other storylines to pursue. The success of Shazam in 2019 triggered the development of a sequel. Soon, it was confirmed that Zachary Levi, writer Henry Gayden, director David F. Sandberg, and producer Peter Safran were all coming back. In early 2021, in the trail of her breakout performance in Spielberg's West Side Story remake, Rachel Zegler was booked for a meeting with DC Cinematic Universe casting director Rich D'Elia, who had envisioned her in the role of Kara Zor-El/Supergirl in the upcoming The Flash. Zegler ultimately lost out to Sasha Calle, but D'Elia suggested she audition for the role of Anthea in the Shazam sequel. Zegler would indeed go to snatch the part after a successful chemistry test via Zoom with co-star Dylan Grazer. Oscar winner Helen Mirren and Emmy-nominated Lucy Liu were confirmed as the main antagonists in the film. After months of cast members and production crew sending cryptic messages teasing the appearance of Wonder Woman, a TV spot aired during WWE SmackDown in early March confirmed that Gal Gadot would indeed be making a cameo appearance in the film. In 2023, Shazam! Fury of the Gods hit theaters, failing to make an impression with audiences. With a budget of $125 million, the film only managed to rake in $133 million, making it the fifth consecutive box office bomb in the DC Cinematic Universe. Despite its good intentions, the film just felt like a watered-down version of all the things that made the first one such a success. Reviews were mixed, with Frank Scheck of The Hollywood Reporter writing, "Like some children who aren't so cute anymore after they've grown up a little, this follow-up lacks much of the appeal of its predecessor." Owen Gleiberman wrote for Variety, "The film isn't terrible, but it's busy, formulaic, and rather joyless. The Shazam saga has been given an expensive haircut, but it's lost a lot of its flavor in the process." Rachel Zegler stirred controversy when she replied to the bad reviews, posting on her Instagram an image of British singer Charlie XCX wearing a t-shirt that reads, "They don't build statues of critics." She doubled down, going on Twitter to defend the superhero sequel against unnecessary hate. "Hey, our film is actually really good," she wrote on Twitter, "but mostly I just absolutely loved making it and the people I met whilst doing so. Go see it, give it a chance. We have an 85% audience score for a reason. Some people out there are just being senselessly mean, and it's unnecessary." In January 2023, the new DC Studios co-CEOs James Gunn and Safran said there is potential for Levi to reprise his role in their new plans for the DC Cinematic Universe, but a decision on the character had not been made yet. Director David F. Sandberg went on Twitter to comment on the future of Shazam, pointing out it depended mainly on the fans. He definitely won't come back if people don't go see the movie. What I've been told is that there's nothing in the Shazam films that contradict the future plans for DC, so the possibility for more Shazam is there, and if that's what you want, your best bet is to go see the film. 2023 marks 10 years since the release of Man of Steel and the start of the DC Cinematic Universe. Around $2.5 billion have been spent in 12 films that collectively have grossed some $6.3 billion in tickets, not counting additional revenue streams. The actual numbers are not as catastrophic if we take into account that out of the dozen films released so far, half of them have been box office flops. However, the returns are not what's expected from an intellectual property that holds many of the most known characters in pop culture history. In comparison, Marvel also invested $2.5 billion in their first 12 films, but ended up raking in more than $9 billion at the box office. Can anybody say with a straight face that Iron Man was more popular than Superman back in 2008 when the MCU kicked off? And let's not forget, during their first 12 movies, Marvel didn't unleash their biggest characters, the X-Men and Spider-Man. But Marvel excels in consistent tone, creative direction, and intent, while DC's vision is all over the place. They can't even agree on the name of their film line. At first, they called it the DC Cinematic Universe, then they call it the Justice League Universe. Afterwards, they referred to it as World of DC, and later on latched onto the tag DC Extended Universe. In fact, they're still having problems with their branding today. Following the appointment of Peter Safran and James Gunn as heads of DC Studios in 2022, Warner Bros. Discovery referred to its DC film and television series as part of the DC Universe. But there were still leftover movies in the works. The 2023 film The Flash was meant to help the DCEU bounce back. It was based on the popular DC comic book event Flashpoint, an epic time-traveling adventure that featured various alternative versions of DC's pantheon of characters. A Flash movie has been in contention since the very start of the DC Cinematic Universe. But as ironic as it can sound for a character that can manipulate the fabric of time, for one reason or another, the timing has never been right. Over the last decade, creators like Phil Lord and Christopher Miller, Seth Grahame-Smith, Rick Famuyiwa, Robert Zemeckis, Mark Webb, Jordan Peele, and Matthew Vaughn had been all attached to the project, but scheduling issues, creative differences, or plain bad luck have always gotten in the way, preventing the film from getting off the ground. In January 2018, writer-directors John Francis Daley and Jonathan Goldstein had a lighthearted approach to the project ready to go. The success of the fun, swashbuckling Aquaman was fresh, and understandably, Warner Bros. Was keen on pursuing that tone. Ezra Miller, on the other hand, was less than enthusiastic. Unsatisfied with the script, the actor took the initiative to tackle the story himself, penning a more serious version with the aid of superstar comic book writer Grant Morrison. Reportedly, the studio gave the pair 2 weeks to hand in a first draft. Warner Bros. Rejected the pitch. However, they asked Miller to stay on board as the film's star. A few months later, Daley and Goldstein parted ways with the project, leading Warner Bros. To enlist Christina Hodson to write a new screenplay. In an interview with Collider, Grant Morrison, author of comic book classics like Arkham Asylum and All-Star Superman, described their script as a science fiction story in the vein of Back to the Future. In November 2019, Andy Muschietti, known for his successful adaptation of Stephen King's It, was confirmed as the director. Principal photography for The Flash was anticipated to start in early 2021 once Miller wrapped up filming for The Secrets of Dumbledore. It seemed like the fastest man alive would have his film at last. Shooting and release dates were pushed back because of the COVID pandemic, but the project was still rolling. But The Flash also had a PR nightmare to deal with: the erratic, oftentimes disturbing behavior of its main star. Since a video of Ezra Miller choking a fan in Reykjavik circulated in 2020, the actor has been at the center of a cascade of disquieting allegations. These range from altercations in bars and charges of burglary to accusations of harassment and grooming. After a string of controversial incidents and arrests in 2022, Warner Bros. Discovery faced pressure to address the situation. The studio considered 3 possible scenarios for the actor. First, if Miller sought professional help, they would proceed with the movie's release as planned and grant limited press exposure to the star. Second, if he didn't seek out help, they would still release the film but cut him entirely from any involvement in marketing. His role would also be potentially recast for future projects. If Miller continued with his erratic behavior, the third option would see the studio canceling the film outright. Miller ended up taking the first option. First, he released a public apology through his representative and announced that they were seeking professional treatment for complex mental health issues. The actor also agreed to attend the film's premiere for photos only and would not give interviews. The Flash was intended to be a key piece in the transition between this current era of the DC cinematic universe and the next one. But when Gunn came in and decided to usher in a new DC universe, the Flash movie served no purpose in the grander narrative. When it was released in 2023, featuring cameos from stars like Ben Affleck's Batman, Gal Gadot's Wonder Woman, and Jason Momoa's Aquaman, it received mixed reviews and grossed only $270 million for a $200 million budget. It received criticism for its convoluted plotlines. And the cameos we did see ended up having little impact on unifying DC, now that Gunn had plans to wipe it clean. Ultimately, it did nothing to usher in the larger, newer vision for the DC universe. But another lesser-known hero was set to take center stage in DC's third movie of 2023, Blue Beetle. Blue Beetle has been part of DC Comics since 1939, with multiple characters reprising the role. This movie saw Jaime Reyes brought to life by director Angel Manuel Soto, with Xolo Maridueña taking the lead role. This film would be unique not only because it would help usher in the new DC universe, but also because it would be the first DC film to focus on a Latino superhero. Soto attempted to pull in historic aspects of the character, like references to original Blue Beetle Dan Garrett, while pushing the universe toward the future.
We did reference as much as we could, from like Dan Garrett, which is like way older in this universe. We do have his suit and we do have his archaeology books. Like if you watch the movie again, you're gonna see archaeology books by Dan Garrett.
When it hit theaters in 2023, Blue Beetle received mixed reviews. Some praised it as an enjoyable family film and a worthy introduction of the character, but some thought it was bland and fell into the trap of superhero tropes. It didn't perform as well as DC hoped for, with a budget of $104 million. It grossed only $129 million at the box office, falling far short of breaking even. But Soto indicated that Jaime Reyes would return to the screen, mentioning he'd spoken to Gunn about potential sequels and appearances in other upcoming projects, like the Booster Gold show first announced to be in development in 2023.
But we both have talked about, our interest in continuing Jaime's story and finding a way for that story to be a part of this new universe.
2023 had been a tough year for DC, with the Shazam sequel, The Flash, and Blue Beetle all underperforming at the box office. But they had one more chance. Aquaman and the Lost Kingdom was slated to hit theaters at the end of 2023. Jason Momoa would be returning to the titular role after bringing DC one of its few successes in his first movie as the hero. Development on the movie began back in 2019 when James Wan was tapped as director, but this Aquaman movie would come with its own share of drama. COVID was already a hindrance to production, but that wasn't the only challenge the film faced. Amber Heard, who played Aquaman's love interest Mera in the first film, had a very publicized defamation trial against Johnny Depp during 2022. Many fans sided with Depp, and Heard received a lot of negative press. As a result, a Change.org petition advocating for her removal from the Aquaman sequel received millions of signatures. Heard alleged that Wan tried to remove her from the film and that her role, which ended up being small in the film, was significantly reduced because of the bad press from the trial. However, Wan denied the claims, saying she was never meant to have a major role in the second film. The film was originally set for release in 2022, but got pushed back twice. When it finally made it to theaters in December 2023, the film received scathing critics' reviews and an under-average audience performance. With a big budget of $205 million, it made only $440 million at the box office. Aquaman and the Lost Kingdom was supposed to be the end of the DCEU, paving the way for Gunn to start his new DC universe. But for most DC fans, it was a disappointing ending, leaving them hoping Gunn's next universe will hold something more promising. So will Gunn be able to pull DC out of its constant struggles as he ushers in the DC universe? One of the main problems that the DC cinematic universe has had so far is a lack of cohesive vision throughout their films. James Gunn commented to Gizmodo on how he viewed the DC universe up until his appointment and how he envisions its future. It's been a real fucked up journey for DC. I think that there was basically no one minding the mint, and they were giving out IP to any creatives that, smiled at whoever was in charge. There was never any real power given to the people in charge. and so somebody could always go over their head and do whatever they wanted. It's been a tumultuous journey so far for DC's cinematic universe. The past 10 years have been marked by a series of highs and lows, a few successes, and many setbacks. Through creative clashes, behind-the-scenes turmoil, and struggles to find a cohesive vision, the road has been rocky. Yet, amidst the chaos, it's undeniable that there have been moments of genuine passion. Iconic characters were brought to life and were treated by captivating performances that have left a mark on the superhero genre. And DC's journey is far from over. With a new era of DC coming in, will Gunn be able to dodge the mistakes the studio made in the past? Only time will tell.